Hey, I'm Martin Pichlmair, and I was talking here today at the symposium of the Coded Cultures event in the assembling things, in the theme of assembling things. And what I was talking about was more or less my personal history that brought me from producing media art pieces to producing computer games, which I'm occupied with nowadays. And kind of the...
Maybe an example from a media piece?
Example of media pieces would be the 7 Mile boots that I've done with Eric Berger and Laura Belloff, which were on show in various locations. And they were variable audio boots that you could put on and walk around with, and they were talking to you. Well, people were talking to you through them, basically. And another example is the Bagatelle Concrete, which is a pinball machine modified that is here in the exhibition also. Which is also a keyword, because pinball is a game, and I somehow more and more developed from producing device art pieces or highly technological pieces to producing game situations in either in performance environments or then later as game pieces like Bagatelle Concrete.
Do you think you lose the edge by being more playful? Do you lose your theoretical focus when doing things that are more fashionable, maybe?
Yes, the depth of the piece is of course different if you produce a consumer product like a game. But game art per se is not less intellectual than any other art, media art, I would say. But it makes it puts the tangible interactivity in front of everything else, and that's what's very interesting to me. So if I produce a game now, I also use a rich cultural context and do a lot of research. But the interactivity and actually with games, of course, the fun is always in front of it. So that's maybe the difference, just where you put the emphasis, but not so much the. If you do research or if you have a theoretical aspect or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, could you describe the game you've done for the iPhone?
Well, we are working on the second game now, which is very close to release, but I can't talk about it yet. Stay tuned. The other game that we've done was a space music shoot-'em-up mashup between a music game and a space shooter. It's completely anti-violent because it has no explosions, but instead of blowing things up, you produce music by we don't even have shots, you just target enemies and they dissolve into music. That's how I could put it.
In Austria there's a tendency to make a clear distinction between the critical or focused approach of art and the kind of the pure consumer products. Aren't you afraid that having a background as an artist, that the consumers will just demand that the game works well and is fun and they won't have any idea out of it?
Well, if you do a good work, then it's not the question. On the other hand, I think this distinction is only made in very few areas of art. I mean, painters don't have to justify themselves for doing a beautiful painting. It's media art and it's performance art and it's maybe sometimes theater that has to fight this battle that we are important because we are so critical, but that's not so much the case in other areas of art, which doesn't mean that I'm now a kind of digital painter. I just think it's not necessary to produce art that it has to be critical. It's sometimes the right way to go and sometimes not.
What is your main motivation if you approach a new project? What drives you?
When I approach, well, that's actually the mode of working hasn't changed a bit. What drives me is always as a generator idea. Sometimes something I experienced when I was a kid, like with this pinball machine. I decided when I was about 7 that I want to produce a pinball machine, and it took me 23 years to get there, more than that actually. But it's somehow that I more or less wake up and have an idea out of anything, and then I just start working on it, and it changes all the time until it reaches a point of saturation where it where I can grasp it and fixate it and perfect it, and then I can release it into the public. And that's exactly the same with games as it is with any other creative product like art. So.
Super. Maybe just I'll stop here. But, could you explain the pinball machine? How is it different to a normal pinball machine?
With the pinball machines, we just exchanged everything that has to do with the game of pinball, like everything that has to do with points and competition with music. So you don't play for a score, you play for music. You don't play better than someone else, you just play louder than someone else or more intensive. So normal pinball machines reflects what you do on the playing field with lights and a bit with sound and of course with points. We reflected with music, so we more or less changed points for music, and the fun is that you get your own personal soundtrack to your style of play.